After changing, I made my way to the dining hall. Safira accompanied me, questioning me the whole way.
Are you ready for marriage?
Not really, but it's not like I have a choice.
Do you love her?
No, I stopped walking. We just met. I like her. I truly hope this works between us, I continued.
I apologize. I got carried away with my questioning.
It's okay, Safira. I can't get mad at you. You're like a second mother to me, I said as we started walking again. Safira was always the one constant figure in all 8 of our lives. She was the only person other than RCM with whom our parents trusted the safety of their children. But Safira was the only guard personally charged with our safety, so she was always around. RCM, on the other hand, mostly frightened us with her tattoos.
Your mother hates herself for not being able to raise her children herself.
Safira said as we entered the dining hall.
Where is Miralise?
Mother asked. With Lilica. The dress Cheyenne gave Miralise made her want to throw up, I said, looking at Cheyenne, who tried to keep an indifferent look on her face. Mother just shook her head. I can only imagine what she did to your room, Vasily said. I ignored him upon seeing our father was well enough to argue. I couldn't stop myself. Dad, I don't see why I have to be the next king. I don't want the crown.
You know, we don't discuss official matters at the dinner table,
He replied. Before I could say anything, Lilica and Miralise entered.
Sorry you were late, but the dress Shayana gave Miralist made her want to throw up and hide in the cave for years.
Lilica said casually, making Miralise wince. She wore a cobalt blue and black lace dress. The necklace I had given her still hung around her neck. You look great, I said, pulling the chair out for her.
Thank you. Hopefully your brother will get lost in the castle.
The doors opened again. Miralise muttered something as Casper entered. She looked at the large dining hall, the few statues and paintings that adorned the wall. Her guard entered the room, still silent, and sat across the table beside Lilica. I turned to Miralise and spotted her observing the guards in their winged hussar armor. There were 2 stationed at each of the 3 doors. Then she turned her attention to our father, who wore his navy blue uniform with a double-buttoned red chest. His left arm rested on the tabletop. Our mother sat on his left, wearing a silver and blue dress. I nudged Miralise with my foot under the table. She stomped on my toes. As we were eating, Miralise noticed how I was holding my fork oddly, how my index finger wouldn't curl.
What happened to your hand?
She asked. Lilica moaned and squirmed uncomfortably in her chair. I'll tell you about it later, I replied.
Miralise, I hope you find our island to your liking.
Mother said.
It is different from my lands, but it's not... What is the word?
She thought for a moment.
Unbearable?
She asked me. That means you can't tolerate it, I answered.
It's not unbearable.
She said.
That's how I felt.
Father said.
My king, my father admits your idea to educate the children of your kingdom about all walks of life is a good idea. He hopes you will not, what is it?
Intervene in the conflict on the continent.
Father helped her.
Yes, the soldiers that were allowed to be sent helped stop the fighting, but there is still hostility,
She said. Father assured her that Cordova would not intervene on the continent unless the Dark Elf houses asked us to.
Enough about that. Where would you like to have your wedding?
Mother asked. Casper coughed to cover a laugh when Miralise said she wanted our wedding to be in the forest. Miralise and Mother just glared at him. Although our mother was emotionless and more or less doing it by instinct at this point, unlike Miralise, who was filled with annoyance.
The nicest place I can think of is Hell Forest.
Father said. Miralise tore her glare away from Casper and looked at him in surprise. Father laughed.
It was supposed to be called Hill Forest because of the rolling hills, but the sign maker misspelled the name.
He explained.
Vasily, what about you?
Mother asked. A forest wedding sounds nice, but I would have to ask Katsiana where she would like for it to take place.
Is Nefertiti in the capital?
Miralise asked. Nefertiti, the captain of the Cordovan Guard, normally went by Nefel.
Yes, she should be in her office.
Mother said as she placed her hand on the table. She smiled as Father placed his hand on hers, struggling to do so. Even after all this time and everything they had been through, they were still deeply in love with each other.
Miralise, I heard you were well educated. How many degrees do you have?
Cheyenne asked. Seeing Mary Lisa's confusion, Lilica answered.
They do not have universities on the continent. Thank you, Lal.
Mary Lisa replied,
I see you name my sister.
said Cheyenne.
Yes. Her name is unpronounceable. I would love to learn more about the universities.
Mary Lisa said as she looked at me. Lilica would love to tell you all about the Erewhon University, I replied. Lilica decided to try and get Mary Lisa's guard to talk as the food was brought out. Casper sighed. Lilica, you're wasting your time.
How do you find Cordova?
She asked. I looked at Mary Lisa, who grinned at her guard. Lilica tried again.
I usually do not talk to other people either. How do you like the food?
She asked. I looked at their mother and father. She had taken a steak from him and was cutting it up for him, while he tried hard to be invisible. It is very good, the guard said finally, surprising everyone. His voice was deep, but not as deep as I would have thought.
It's good, but I prefer it when Mother cooks. She always does on the last snowfall of every year.
Lilica said. Her cooking is very good, I added, and Mother began to laugh.
What is it?
Mary Lisa asked.
Last year, when I finished cooking, I took everything out to the table. I got the ham, potatoes, carrots, and everything else. I was just packing up the turkey, and it slid off the platter. Thankfully, it fell on a chair and not the floor.
What did you do? Asked Mary Lisa's guard.
Everyone was waiting, so I put it on the platter and took it out.
Mother laughed.
A little bit of dirt in your diet is good for you.
Father sighed. Good thing I'm allergic to poultry, Vasily said. She dropped a ham on the floor, Casper said.
I'd rather eat food that was dropped on the floor as opposed to K-rations.
Father said. Cheyenne looked at him.
Dirty turkey is better than Spam and crackers.
He continued. After dinner was finished, we lingered in the dining hall.
My king, I agree with your fight against the glamour of war.
Mary Lisa said.
I'm sorry, my daughter, but normally we don't discuss things like this at the dinner table. It's a haven from the aggravation of politics.
Father replied.
I apologize.
Mary Lisa said.
Where I come from, war lost its glory centuries ago, before I was born, if it ever had any.
He paused and Mother grabbed his hand.
After a few times in battle, I got used to seeing death. I unknowingly blocked out the sights and stopped caring, but every now and then, you see something that reaches into you and tugs at your heart.
He cleared his throat as his voice began to tremble, and Mother, still holding his hand, looked at him sympathetically.
Whenever I would pick up a fallen soldier, it didn't matter if it was an enemy or not, because it was just a body. But when you would pick them up, their helmets would fall off. Sometimes it would land upside down, and you would see a picture of their child, wife, or family inside, and you'd realize it's not just a body, it's someone's husband, someone's father, someone's son that you're picking up. There's someone praying for them to come home alive.
How did you cope? Casper asked.
That's enough talking about this.
Father said, and quickly changed the conversation by asking Cheyenne what she was going to name her child. Lilica silently pouted. She wanted to take after her mother and have a large family. It was clear that she was jealous of her sister. I led Mary Lisa down the long, broad halls on the first level below the castle's ground floor in the east wing. The hall, with its high ceiling and tall, heavy doors lining both sides, housed offices of government and military officials, as well as my office and Lilica's study, which were a few doors apart.
What happened to your finger?
Mary Lisa asked. When we were children, Casper and I were making fun of Lilica. She tried to get away from us, but we followed her, and she slammed the door on my hand and broke my finger.
Your parents did not get a healer?
My mom was in the Sereb capital, and our dad just got 2 sticks and some baling twine and tied the sticks around my finger. Neffle's office is ahead on the right. When we reached her office, I knocked on the door.
If it's not important, go away.
She called out. Is that how you talk to a prince? I called back.
The door's unlocked.
I opened the door for Miralise, and then entered. Neffel was sitting in the chair behind her desk. I brought you a guest, I said as I closed the door.
We'll get to that in a minute. Have a seat.
She said as she pointed to a chair across from her. She propped her feet on her desk as Miralise and I sat.
How was the trip to Zalizo?
It was a long trip.
Is that all? You did not take any side ventures along the way?
She asked. I tried to hide my discomfort. What do you mean?
As the captain of the Cardovan State Guard, not much happens on this island that I do not know about. So, what happened on the way to Zalizo? Did you get a little sidetracked?
She asked. It was a typical trip. I started, but stopped as she reached under her desk and set a battle axe on top of it.
The last time I saw this axe, your father used it to disable his ship. I can tell you what was in the report that was given to me with this axe, or you can tell me,
she said. I looked at Miralise, who was looking between Neffel and me with an amused expression. I sighed and told Neffel what happened on our side venture to find my father's life pod.
I'm glad I did not have to question Lilica, but you should have known there would be Cardovan guards trailing you.
Neffel said.
What is wrong with questioning?
Miralise nudged me with her elbow. Lilica, I helped.
She is excellent at making me feel like a bad guy for questioning her,
Neffel said. As we sat in Neffel's office, she pushed the papers on her desk aside. She dropped the axe on the floor. She looked identical to my mother, except for her eyes. I never could get used to her two different colored eyes. Her sapphire eye sparkled in the candlelight, and her honey amber eye gleamed.
It is always nice to see you, Nefertiti. I apologize for not thanking you for your magic lessons. Unlike the tutors my father provided, you did not get frustrated for struggling through my lessons.
Miralise replied. Neffel smiled as she stood.
Do not worry. You are just a child then. Are you excited about your upcoming wedding?
Neffel asked as she walked to a small table against the opposite wall with a decanter atop it. Miralise looked at a small bookshelf for a moment as Neffel poured 3 glasses.
A little.
Miralise finally said. I was not surprised by her answer. After getting to know Miralise, I was starting to look forward to our wedding.
Well, at least Nefertari picked the better son for you, and your mother picked the better daughter.
Neffel sighed as she sat the 3 glasses on her desk. Miralise thought for a moment.
Yes. I hope that we can continue the work the king and queen started.
She looked around the office.
I did not think that elves had much interest in our government.
Neffel said.
I do,
Miralise grunted as she began to struggle with my father's name.
Zeta.
Neffel helped.
Yes. He does not rely on old ways of governing like religion, looking to the stars, or military might. I have grown tired of seeing pointless military conquest.
Miralise sighed.
Haven't we all?
Neffel replied. She grabbed her right forearm as if a phantom pain struck her.
My father told me about your first trip to our lands.
Miralise sighed. Neffel was sent to the southern continent with a scarred hound pack for a training mission, but they were attacked. 3 men were killed and her arm was broken. After a few more minutes of discussing Miralise's view of war, it became apparent it was time to change the subject. Why does Caspar hate you and Sephira? I asked when Miralise was finished. Neffel laughed as she stood.
He put a hissing spider in Sephira's jewelry box as a prank, and it got loose in our chambers,
she said as she retrieved a wooden doll from the corner.
He filled my desk with rats.
Miralise muttered as Neffel sat the doll on the desk.
Miralise's father gave this to yours as a gift for you and your siblings when you were a baby.
Neffel continued. I looked at the toy, which was the size of a small child and resembled an elf, only terrifying. The face had wide eyes, a long hooked nose, and an evil grin. Whoever made it must have hated children.
Your father did not give it to Caspar right away, but a few days after Sephira found the spider in her jewelry box. He gave it to both of you, and Caspar was horrified by it, so I thought he might like his new friend if it could talk.
I looked to Miralise and her lips were pressed tightly together, trying to fight the urge to laugh.
I am not a toy!
The doll said in a squeaky voice. You brought it to life? I asked, surprised.
No, I used an animation spell on it,
she replied.
We were in the courtroom. The doors flew open and Caspar came running in with the doll chasing after him, yelling, "Hug me!" and Sephira chasing after it. Ever since then, he has hated me, and since Sephira and I are married, he hates her too.
How long does the animation spell last? I asked.
Until I reverse it, and I cannot figure out how to.
So just sits in a corner in your office? I asked.
No, he takes care of my filing and cleans my office.
So you gave it a job? I asked, and my words came out slowly and drawn out, making Neffel laugh. I decided to leave Miralise and Neffel. I walked down the hall to my office.
Where is your elf?
My secretary asked, a young woman who was a former cavalry officer until a training incident left her wheelchair bound. She was half Russian and half Serb, her skin purple with a touch of gray, giving it a slightly smoky appearance. With Neffel, who gave you flowers, Natalia? I asked, seeing a bouquet on her desk.
From someone special. A letter came for you from the capital of the Red Guard. I put it on your desk.
I looked at her. We both knew that could only mean one of two things, a promotion or I was being relieved of my duties. I walked into my office to see the letter sitting atop a stack of papers.
What is it?
I turned to see my mother standing in the doorway. I don't know, I said as she took the letter and opened it.
By order of the Queen, you are to be relieved of your duties effective immediately.
She said as she sat in one of the two chairs on the other side of my desk. I was furious at what she had just read. She set the paper on the table and drummed her fingers on the armrest. I just stood, glaring at her. Mother knew better than anyone that I didn't want the crown, but she insisted that I marry Miralise, and now I'd lost my position in the Red Guard because of her. I finally dropped into my chair, and she explained she knew how I felt because she didn't want to be queen. She'd only stayed because of how much she loved my father.
I'm sorry, my son.
Her voice cracked.
But you were destined to have a rough life. It was decided with the birth of your great-grandmother, Agaska.
She looked behind me as if there was someone standing there. When I came of age, she made me make a clay pot. Then every month I had to burn incense in Agaska's room next to the one my mother made. One day a third pot appeared along with a bone axe. I felt an ice-cold hand on my shoulder. I looked back and there was nothing. Then I looked back to my mother. I shot out of my chair. Sitting next to my mother, she was smiling, and her eyes. Oh, Thor, those are the eyes of a demon. She looked to the chair to her right and groaned.
I was wondering when I would see you again, Hathor.
I looked at the woman sitting in the chair, smiling. In the blink of an eye, she changed. She wore a sleeveless golden dress. Her skin was white as snow, her ears pointed like daggers, long hair that flowed like a molten silver in those scarlet eyes.
My servant, I see. She has been taking care of you.
She looked at my mother. Hathor stood and walked along my row of bookshelves.
So many books, and you haven't read a single word in one.
Her dress came to her knees, and she wore no boots or shoes, only a black anklet on her right ankle. She was beautiful. I'm working on them. She turned with a grin, and a pale blue light shot from her eyes into mine. She walked back to the chair next to my mother. I slumped into my seat as my mother explained what happened when Cheyenne was only a year old, how she was kidnapped and my mother was taken trying to save my sister. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest and I gripped the armrest on my chair. A black horn mass formed at the back of my office when my mother mentioned Agaska. Frozen in fear, I watched as the man gained detail. Black armor, 2 swords at the demon's side, a hooked nose, and the weary snow-white mustache above a mouth frozen in a wicked war cry.
Ah, you're Babcia Agaska.
Hathor said as the demon reached up and pulled down its mask, revealing a young tan-skinned woman's face. A red stripe was painted across her face. Agaska stood at the back of the room, staring at me as Hathor explained that I would go into the Kingdom of Shadows and kill the Russian demon. She was certain that he wanted to unleash the Shadow Army, and that Cordova would be his first conquest due to our advanced weapons and ships. Hathor informed me that she had dispatched her 2 oldest and most trusted servants to the Kingdom of Shadows to ensure the curse held the dead and the darkness within its borders, but she was unable to control them once they entered the kingdom. The goddess turned to my mother.
My sons will join him.
That caught Agaska's attention.
I wed so that I could birth demigods to assist your son. I love my husband.
Questions swirled in my head. Patience, my servant. All will be explained. I heard Hathor's soothing voice in my head. The door opened. I looked. It was Miralise. When I looked back, Hathor was gone. My mother stood.
I'll leave the 2 of you.
Mother said as she took her leave. Miralise sat on my desk. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I met her large, golden-green eyes as I stood. She was talking and my lips met hers. A large calloused hand roughly clenched my wrist and ripped it off her thigh. I was thrown into my chair by Renelis's guard. He looked at her and pointed to the chair on the other side of the desk. Her cheeks were a deep red as she sat in the chair he was pointing to. We sat in an awkward silence as he left the room. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. She was gorgeous. Behind her, Hathor was standing and grinning. I was too busy looking at her to notice Miralice's guard re-enter with a vase from Natalia's desk.
Hey!
She yelled as she dumped the water into my lap, then left us. When I looked up from my lap, Natalia glared at Miralice's guard as he stormed out. I looked back to Miralice. She was looking through my bookshelves. Her cheeks were bright red. I stood and walked to her as she took down a thick red book that had been lying atop several others on a shelf and promptly blew the dust off of it. My eyes were drawn to her lips.
Cordovan state laws.
She opened the book as she walked to the couch. I looked through numerous titles on my bookshelves, looking for something about the Kingdom of Shadows, but it was no use. Most of my books were on law and Red Guard regulations or random books that were just for show. I knew that my mother was telling the truth, and if she was there, that I was not seeing things. Where could I find out anything about the Kingdom of Shadows? I thought for a moment until I turned. I need to go take care of something. Make yourself at home, I said to Miralice. She glanced up as I walked past. I heard the squeaking of Natalia's wheelchair as she rolled into my office. I was heading to the one person that I was absolutely sure knew anything about the Kingdom of Shadows, toward the single most educated, annoying, and childish person in Morong, and possibly in this world.